Hey, this is Skipen. I'm back with another illustration breakdown. This is a video series where I openly talk about my drawing process in a more laid-back fashion compared to my other videos. This includes any tools that I use as well as any functions that stand out in the video. For this piece, I use the Surface Go 2 and Paint Tool Side 2, or the developer version. The sketch as well as some of the line work was actually done on a train. So what's really great about these portable drawing tablets is we never had this opportunity 10, 20 years ago as visual artists to take our preferred tools and work with them anywhere. They've really gotten small enough and the software and hardware experience has become good enough that I feel comfortable taking an iPad or Surface device out with me to just sketch anytime, anywhere, and often find myself continuing on to do my line work even if I'm on public transportation. If that sounds appealing to you, the Surface Go 2 and Paint Tool Side are a great combination, especially on public transportation because of a function called linework layers. These layers offer you access to tools like the one I'm currently using. As you'll see during the video, I'm able to manipulate my lines after I've made a stroke, and I'm using this to match my sketch as best as possible. This is really useful for curves like when drawing a skirt, and also really great for drawing hair, but also makes it very easy to correct any mistakes while lining, which is especially helpful when you're drawing on public transportation. I think it's also a great tool for those who are new to digital art. It's really easy to, say, take a picture of something that you've drawn in your sketchbook, and then use this tool to make really nice clean lines on top of that. Since you have so much control over the lines, you can even do this with a mouse. So if you don't have access to a pen tablet, you could still totally use this feature to make really clean anime line work. Unfortunately, OBS did crash on me there, so I did lose the very end of the line work making process, but I just continued on like what you were seeing and also added the base color layers. So this drawing, I made it in the autumn. I wanted to give it that kind of feel, so I was trying to choose that fashion, colors, different things like that that suited the mood. And I feel like in the end I did get something that matches the theme. One question that I do frequently get asked is how do I color clothing? And it's very difficult for me to explain it, especially in a video like this. I think I'll go ahead and sit down and really form my thoughts and make a video one day, but the best way I could explain is I use a very standard brush, something like a Photoshop round brush where the start and end of it have a little bit of taper in the opacity, but it's not really something that has pen pressure settings. If it does, it's very light. I take that brush and I'll go ahead and lay down where the shadows should be. After I use that simple brush, I will take a blur tool, or in the case of Paint Tool Size, something like a watercolor brush, and smooth it out. This gives it a really nice soft feeling compared to like a cell shading feeling. And then after that, I'll take, say, airbrush and go ahead and add some depth by either taking my base color, not the shadow color, the base color, and adding a little bit of that, maybe at 50% opacity, to the shadows, and it really adds some nice 3D effects. You can also have a 3D effect by adding an accent color. So in the case of gray, maybe you want something that's like yellow. And I'll continue to play around with the coloring process by starting again with the base Photoshop brush, moving on to softening it with a blur tool, and then adding accent colors, adding more depth, darker colors, lighter colors for the highlights, etc. And whenever I'm coloring, I tend to bounce around, so I'm not quite done with the shirt there, and I've already started with the skin, but I don't know if it's really a good or a bad thing. I should probably finish up one section before moving on to the next, but I always tend to kind of get bored. I don't know if bored is the right word, but I would reach my limit with one section, move on to something else, and I always come back with kind of whatever I developed. You're able to see a bigger picture. With another section colored, you could go back to the first section and add certain details that would make sense. I'm not sure if I could really recommend it to everyone watching, but it is just what feels natural to me. One day I'll have to try out just finishing something without going back and see how that goes. I think it would be a great video. So on with the skirt here, I started with the shadows again, and I really like the way that the skirt ended up. You can see how I'm just blending different things in to get that 3D effect. And one thing that I forgot to mention earlier in the video was I have that floating window in the top left corner. I think it's really useful to have one of these extra windows when you're doing coloring, especially complex coloring. You can have it more zoomed out, and then in your bigger working window, you can go really small, really zoomed in, and work on different details, but still see what you're doing in that smaller window. I talked about that in an earlier video about Clip Studio Paint, what functions I like to use, and you can check that out here. This time I think I took a really normal approach to coloring the hair. I was just using my base colors and building on top and below that, whether it's highlights or shadows. Normally what I do is I put my shadows first and erase that to reveal the highlights. I don't know if in this case it was because I'm using the surface, which is something I'm not as used to, or I was using paint tool side for the first time in a while, but either way, I decided to go with a more conventional painting style. I really like to get a sharp brush for the hair and lay down some nice quick strokes and then smooth it out later with a watercolor brush. It's really appealing to me to have this mix between softer lines and sharper, smaller lines in the hair. I think even in an anime style, it's really nice to have something that's realistic, where if you think about hair and the way that light hits hair, there's going to be strands of hair above and below each other, and it creates that 3D effect where some of them are going to be more blurred out, whereas some are going to be more sharp and have a more distinct line. So I try to incorporate that even into my anime style drawings. Another thing, I wasn't really sure what color the hair was going to be. Luckily, we have different blending modes, and you can really go in and change hair color whenever you want. In my tutorial video for hair, I detailed a way that you can really go in depth and change lots of different details, but with this, I'm just using blending modes. And just be clear, I'm no longer working on this on a train. The line work was about the last point where I was actually on public transportation. The rest of it has been drawn in my office, and it took me a few days. I really like to spread things out. I think that's why you'll see that I go back and change different things with the line work or the coloring. When you go to bed and wake up with fresh eyes and see something that you did the previous day, it doesn't always look, ideal or the way that you thought it would be. And so it's a good opportunity to go back and fix any mistakes that you find before the finished piece. But also it's kind of a slippery slope. I often find myself trying to correct these things over and over again, and it really takes a lot of time when you should just finish up the piece, move on to the next one, and you'll learn these lessons over time. If you think about it, that you could spend a whole month on one illustration to make it really perfect, and maybe you'll show it to your friends, you'll show it to the world, and it'll look great, but you could have taken that time and drawn 4, 5, 6 pieces. And I think that maybe those first few pieces of the month are not going to be up to your standards, but you'll find that the one at the end of the month is going to be much better. And you compile that over and over again for months and years. You're going to improve much more in the long run if you kind of just suck it up, finish the piece, and move on to the next one. I know it can be very difficult. For me, I find myself always going back and trying to be a perfectionist, but if you kind of find yourself in a similar position, I really encourage you to try to put a time limit onto your drawings, and you'll find that it really helps you improve. I also find that all these small details, they're not necessarily appreciated by everyone. I'm sure someone out there is going to say like, oh wow, I really like that accent color or something. But if you're just posting it online, especially on Instagram, and you're not printing these and you're viewing them as practice pieces, don't let it take over your whole weekend to do one piece. I think you're going to improve a lot more if you focus on the fundamentals and what's important. Something else that I frequently get asked about is how do I color eyes? What I like to do is I go to the line work layer of the eyes. I always have it separate. I'll clip a layer to that and I'll add my base color. And then I'll just continue to build up on top of that. I always have the bottom part of it as a highlight and the top part more of a shadow with an accent color. And the pupil in the middle has the darkest color, but then kind of that base shadow color in the middle. This is my typical drawing style for the eyes. And I think a lot of people do it similar when it comes to an anime style. And this is the point where I typically add a lot of little details to spice up the drawing, give it some more character and life. It's not super necessary if you've already done a good job coloring, but it's something that I like to do. I think you just have to kind of make sure that you don't spend too much time with little details. They should be more subtle than something that you spend a lot of time on. But I really feel like this is the part where I probably should have stopped. I keep on trying to add more and more details, but I think no matter how much time you add, once the piece is like 95% of the way there, you're going to spend an hour, 2 hours to add 0.5%, a percentage point of like improvement. It's very similar to the concept of diminishing returns. I think at some point the piece isn't going to change. It is what it is, and you can try to polish it as much as you want, but it's probably best just to pick up and move on to the next one. And let me know what you think of this concept in the comments below. Do you think it's worth putting all this time and effort in? What do you do with your pieces? I'm very interested to know. That being said, I do like to be thorough. I'm not sure if I'm going to use this for like a review or talk about either Paint Tool Side 2, the surface, whatever. So I wanted a kind of a tentpole piece, and that's why I continued on trying to make it as best as I could while recording. And this is another great showcase for the line work layers in Paint Tool Side. If these were just standard layers, it'd be very difficult to go in and fix any small inconsistencies and errors in the line work. But because they are these special line work layers with editable points, you can go in and really manipulate it to whatever you feel is best. Something else that I frequently do at the end of a piece is I'll put all my layers into a folder and transform some part of it. I find that maybe I drew the character too tall or some of the proportions are off on some aspect of the drawing. And what's nice about putting everything into a folder and manipulating like that is you're going to manipulate the line work, the base colors, and everything that you drew within the coloring folder all at the same time. So you don't have to merge your layers. You can still keep all your layers separate if you want to change something in the future, or if you want to preserve that drawing, but still make the changes that will improve, the piece that you spent a lot of time working on. I also thought, well, I came this far, I'm going to go ahead and add a background, and I wanted to also try to practice my background drawing a bit more. I find that I spend so much time on a character that, it's kind of, it's a shame that I spend so much time and yet they're just in a white space. I modeled the background after this one area in Kyoto called Gion Shijo, where they have all these older buildings and very Japanese style buildings. I thought it matched the autumn theme, lots of orange and those burnt colors between the character and the background. For the background, I thought it'd be best to have it look more like a photo, and so I would blur the background, I would add details, blur it again, and not have so much detail so the character can still stand out, but at least there's something supporting her in the background. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to write them below. I'm also going to be releasing an uncut, a little bit less sped up with no commentary version of this video on my Gumroad. So anyone interested in seeing smaller details, really going deep into how I drew the clothes or the hair or the eyes, you can find that on my Gumroad. I'll have a link down in the description below. It's going to be totally free, and you can find other resources there like brushes and PSD files, all kinds of great stuff. So I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the description. Also, I recorded this video with a software called OBS on my Surface, and I decided to edit it and do this voiceover track on the iPad with LumaFusion. So anyone interested in doing videos like this, LumaFusion is a great way. If you drew something on the iPad, you can totally edit a video like this, record a voiceover, everything all in that app. And if you're interested, I could also try to do a video on that. So let me know. I'm Tsukepen, and thank you so much for watching.